Jai Hind, dear students of class 8. Today we will start chapter number 7 and today we will discuss the first unit of this lesson, a visit to Cambridge. So here my dear students, let's get started with this lesson. So before you read this lesson, first of all I will tell you the outline that is given. This is the story of a meeting between two extraordinary people, both of them disabled or differently abled, or as we now say, Stephen Hawking is one of the greatest scientists of our time. He suffers from a form of paralysis that confines him a wheelchair and allows him to speak only by punching buttons on a computer which speaks for him in a machine like voice. Firdaus Kanga is a writer and journalist who lives and works in Mumbai. Kanga was born in brittle bones that tended to break easily when he was a child. Like Hawking, Kanga moves around in a wheelchair. The two great men exchange thoughts on what it means to live life in a wheelchair and on how the so-called normal people react to the disabled. Right. So now here you can see that the two strange people is being delivered his or her thoughts, right, and they are exchanging their ideas that how life is different from other people, right. So now you can see the first paragraph that is written. Cambridge was my metaphor for England, and it was strange that when I left it had become altogether something else because I had met Stephen Hawking there. It was on walking tour through Cambridge that the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking, poor man who is quite disabled now, though he is worthy successor to Isaac Newton, whose chair he has at the university. Right. So Cambridge is considered as a metaphor, okay, as a symbolism for England, and it was a strange when I left it had become altogether something else because it has Stephen Hawking there. Means the story is related to Stephen Hawking. So it was Stephen Hawking were being described, and it was on a walking tour through Cambridge that the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking, a poor man who is quite disabled. That means I was introduced that Stephen Hawking was also disabled through his worthy successor to Isaac Newton. Right, he is the next generation of Isaac Newton, and whose chair he has at the university. Right. And I started because I had quite forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist, the author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestseller ever, lived here. So I started a conversation because I had quite forgotten that that was the matter for the surprise. So this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist, who is the author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestseller book ever, lived here. When the walking tour was done, I rushed to a phone booth and almost tearing the cord so it could reach me outside. Phoned Stephen Hawking's house. There was his assistant on the line, and I told him I had come in a wheelchair from India. Perhaps he thought I had propelled myself all the way to write about my travels in Britain. I had to see Professor Hawking's event. 10 minutes would do, half an hour, he said, from 3:34. When I have passed my walking tour, I rushed forward towards the phone booth and almost tearing the cord so it could reach me outside. I phoned Stephen Hawking's house, and it was his assistant on the line, and I informed him that I am from India, and I am from India to write about my travel in Britain, and I want to meet Professor Hawking. Even 10 minutes would do. Means if it is probably possible, he will provide me 10 minutes or half an hour, he said, for 3:30 to 4. Right. So the time was given from 3:30 to 4. And suddenly I felt weak all over. Growing up disabled, you get fed up with people asking you to be brave, as if you have a courage and account which you are too lazy to draw a check. The only thing that makes you stronger is seeing somebody like you achieving something huge. Then you know how much is possible and you reach out further than you ever thought you could. Right. So when I was informed, I felt weak. Right. So my growing up disabled, then you get fed up with people asking you to be brave. Means sometimes you will just told by the other to be brave, as if you have a courage on which you are too lazy to draw a check, right? The only thing makes is stronger is seeing somebody like you. When you will feel that there is someone else who is parallel to you, who is similar to you, then you just have you just possess some energy, right? And then you know how much is possible and you reach out further than ever you then could, right? So I haven't been brave, said the disembodied computer voice the next afternoon. I have had no choice. Surely I wanted to say living creatively with the reality of disintegrating body was a choice, but I kept quiet because I felt guilty every time I spoke to him, forcing him to respond. There he was tapping at the little switch in his hand, trying to find the words on his computer with the only bit of movement left to him. His long pale fingers, every so often, his eyes would shut in frustrated exhaustion, and sitting opposite him, I could feel his anguish, the mind buoyant with the thoughts that came out in frozen phrases and sentences stiff as corpses. Okay, so I said, disembodied computer voice said that I haven't been brave, and that next afternoon I haven't no choice. So surely I wanted to inform, like living creatively with the reality of his disintegrated body was a choice, but I kept quiet because I felt guilty every time when I spoke to him. Whenever I was telling something to him, I felt very, very guilty, right? And forcing him to respond, because I was forcing him to respond, right? And there he was tapping at the little switch in his hand, and he was trying to find the words on his computer with the only a bit movement left to him. His long and pale fingers, that means the fingers were also neutral, and every so often his eyes would shut in frustrated exhaustion, means he was tired, that's why his eyes gets closed again and again. And sitting opposite to him, I could feel his anguished mind, buoyant with thoughts that came in frozen phrases, means I could feel his mind that is intensely active and vibrant, right? And a lot of people seems to think that disabled people are chronically unhappy. I said, I know that's not true myself. Are you often laughing inside? So a number of people, definitely a number of people think that disabled, the person who is not able to, who is not physically active, who is not physically fit at every aspect, they are chronologically unhappy. I said it was my opinion, and I also know that it is not true. And are you often laughing inside? So this was my question. About 3 minutes later, he responded, I find it amusing when people patronize me. And do you find it annoying when someone like me comes and disturbs you in your work? The answer flashed, yes. Then he smiled. His one way smile, and I knew, without being sentimental or silly, that I was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world. Our first glimpses of him is shocking because he is like a still photograph, as if all those pictures of him in magazines and newspapers have turned three-dimensional. So when I asked this kind of question, about 3 minutes later, he responded that I find it amusing when people raise fingers against me. And he asked, and do you find it annoying when someone like me comes and disturbs you? Means when you do you become angry when someone like me comes approach to you and asks something and seeking for the help? Then the answer flashed, yes. And he smiled, he cheered, and his way is smile. I knew with his smile, without being sentimental or silly, I was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world, right? Our first glimpses of him is shocking because he is like a still photograph, as if all those pictures of him in magazines and newspapers have turned three-dimensional. Then you see the head twisted sideways into a slump, the torso shrunk inside the pale blue shirt,